Okay, the good news about the Calvin cycle is that you don't really need to know any of the specific steps. You really just need to know what goes in, what comes out, and just like what are the players. Now remember, the Calvin cycle happens in the liquid part of the chloroplast called the stroma, not in the thylakoid discs, but the thylakoid discs are right over here. Remember, we just did photophosphorylation. So the Calvin cycle is basically the opposite of the citric acid cycle. So if you remember, with the citric acid cycle, we took in parts of glucose and we burned them to produce carbon dioxide. And we took all the hydrogen from glucose and put it onto NAD to make NADH. Well, the Calvin cycle is going to do absolutely the opposite. It's going to take carbon dioxide and produce a sugar, produce glucose with it, and it's going to use NADPH as a source of hydrogen. And instead of making ATP like the citric acid cycle, it's going to use ATP because we're doing anabolism. We're building a sugar. So I'm going to just show you the very basics of how this happens. I'm going to make sure everything is in the field of view. Okay. So these are going to be my models for carbon dioxide. Okay. So it's not just a carbon, it's carbon dioxide. And these three blocks are representing 3 molecules of RUBP, or ribulose bisphosphate. So the ribulose bisphosphate, or RUBP, has 5 carbons. So the reason why I'm making these yellow is so you can distinguish them between these. But these are 5 carbon molecules. They don't just have carbons. Of course, they have hydrogens and oxygens as well. But these 3 5-carbon molecules are going to combine with these 3 molecules of carbon dioxide. Remember, in photosynthesis, the overall reaction is carbon dioxide plus water, right, goes to sugar plus oxygen. We already saw where oxygen was produced over here in photophosphorylation. But now we're going to see how the carbon dioxide is combined to make the sugar. So each carbon dioxide is going to combine with each RUBP molecule to make 3 6-carbon molecules. The enzyme that does this is called Rubisco, which is actually an acronym sort of for ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase. Rubisco is the most important enzyme on Earth because it's taking carbon dioxide from the air and putting it into a usable molecule. We call this carbon fixation. So we fixed the carbon, or affixed the carbon into something that can be built into a plant and then therefore going into the food chain. So the next enzyme of the process breaks these into 3 carbon units. And then from here, I'm just going to do a lot of hand waving because I don't have any structures to show you how they change. But it doesn't really matter. What we're going to be doing is using ATP to phosphorylate these molecules along the way. And we're going to use NADPH to add hydrogen to the molecules to reduce them. But that's kind of a lot of hand waving too because I can't really show you how the hydrogen goes on these. But the most important thing that you should understand is that one of these 3-carbon molecules turns into a sugar, a 3-carbon sugar, and that's going to be our product. It's called PGA, or G3P actually. G3P is a 3-carbon sugar. We're going to do this whole cycle twice, and then you'll get 2 3-carbon sugars, and you'll be able to make glucose with it. But notice now, what's left over here, if this is our product, that and NADP, which has been oxidized, and ADP, because we've used up the ATP, these 5 3s will be rearranged in the next parts of the Calvin cycle back to our starting molecules. So we're going to do a bunch of chemical reactions to get back to our 3 5s again. So this will be your RUBP. Notice that this is your 3-carbon sugar product, and then you would do this whole thing again, adding 3 more carbon dioxides making another 3-carbon product, and then those would go together to make glucose. Once you make the glucose, this is the most important thing of the whole photosynthesis. The plant can do with that glucose whatever it needs to do with it. So it can build cellulose, it can store it as amylose, it can change the glucose into fatty acids or proteins if it needs nitrogen from the soil to do that, to get the amine groups. But it can make the plant. So photosynthesis builds the raw materials to produce the plant. So all of those plants I showed you in those videos all came from a tiny seed, right? And that tiny seed really only had the baby plant in it. But all the materials that it took to grow that plant came from the air, right? Carbon dioxide and water. Remember, the water was used to replenish the electrons in photophosphorylation. So that carbon dioxide was then harvested to produce sugar, and then that sugar can be used to make the whole plant. And then that's the basis of the food chain, because then all the herbivores eat the autotrophs, and then the carnivores eat the herbivores, and all the molecules that are in the whole ecosystem comes from the Calvin cycle, because that's the time that it's produced from the air. So plants make stuff. They make themselves from air and water, which is insane. It's like the greatest magic trick in the world, right? I can make food in my garden from the air and the water. And then all I need to do is give them some nitrogen and some minerals. But that's a very small portion of what makes up the plant. The plant is mostly air and water.